Hi, welcome to Up Your Nerd Cred. Did you used to know everything that was happening in the Marvel and DC universes? Did finding out that some superheroes are from Marvel and some are from DC blow your mind? Has keeping track of everything that's happening there and then realizing that we're only talking about the comics universes, not the cinematic ones. And the different universes with their own multiversal crises have gotten a little bit out of hand? Well, don't worry. Up Your Nerd Cred is here to talk about the gods cosplaying as men, the men cosplaying as gods, and how much cinematic universes are really leaving out. At the end of each episode, you'll hopefully know a little bit more than you did and can up your nerd cred. I'm your casual nerd host, CiCi. I am neither the first nor the last New Yorker to be a little annoyed at the piles of dog poop post snow melt, but I don't know, can we get Zoran to set up a few more like poop bag trash can stations? Or you know how the TVA in the is I think that style thing where the way that he did it with the snow and got the folks out. Maybe get him out cleaning the streets, sanitation's job. But I'm just saying a good scrub could be useful. Then again, the way that it's been running, I'm going to completely forget to mention that this is a solo episode. Yay! It's just you and me, podcast listener, right? But I want to make sure that we are clear that just because we are clarifying the format does not mean that we're going to skip out on the format altogether, right? Of course, right. So, what are we nerding out about this week? As a reminder to the new listeners, we can nerd out about all kinds of things, okay? It doesn't just have to be heroes and villains. I am pretty certain that Senator Kennedy politely cussing out Kristi Noem for spending $220 million on ads with her face on it and then saying that DJT signed off on it. I think those are the reasons why we're about to have DHS head Mark Wayne Mullen. Also, the McDonald's CEO made a really awkward attempt to market the Archburger, and now a bunch of the CEOs from a bunch of other burger brands are parodying him. And also, as an aside, the whole Britney Spears DUI situation probably has the whole Free Britney subreddit on higher alert. I don't spend much time there, but it's probably a problem. Let's take a second, completely separate from the Britney situation, and ask what it is that I am nerding out about. So, I have actually been having the best time with the videos of a creator that I follow on TikTok, Daniel Rabinovitz. Now, he's actually working on a book, generally speaking, about Orthodox Jewish vampires, right? And yet somehow that's turned into a discussion about the kashrut rules, the kosher rules surrounding Pokemon, right? Like eating, battling with, and just like, whether or not an Orthodox Jew would be able to play with like a Cuban or an athlete, right? Okay, now listen, I was proud of myself when I knew all 151, right? And then I accepted that there were a new 100, right? But now there's so many that I have no idea if sound combinations are actual Pokemon or if someone's just kind of like testing my Japanese knowledge by making compound sounds at me. Spoiler alert, if I did not learn the word while watching Sailor Moon with subs, I could probably be tricked into thinking that something was a Pokemon. Anyway, what's really cool is that he actually has like, a compendium of tons of Jewish law, not just the Talmud, but like, anyway. So he's actually able to figure out how rules would apply to these completely fictional characters, like to a certain extent. How many times can a Ditto use transform to turn into a Pokemon that is technically unclean for battle, right? So Daniel's figured out that Talmudically, if you can have up to about 1 part in 60 being unkosher before it kind of like, negatively impacts the rest of the kosher status of something, then theoretically, if the Ditto is only transformed into a Pokemon that's like unclean, not kosher to battle with, once every 6 times or so, then it's not quite unkosher. It's not gonna ruin the entire Ditto for the Orthodox Jew, right? So as long as you keep it within maybe like every 70 times or so, you let it turn into something that is not ritually clean, right? But also, there's also the conversation about the part where you have to be careful with if you have your Ditto doing your, occasional unclean transform, right? Because you don't want other Orthodox Jews thinking that you're out here just battling all willy-nilly with non-kosher Pokemon, right? Like fossil ghost type Pokemon. Okay, those are gonna be considered necromancy, right? Actually, hang on. There's something he said about whether or not you could eat the berries from some grass type mode Pokemons, and I need to just double check to make sure that I'm following the instructions correctly, right? Please hold, and we'll be right back to Up Your Nerd Cred. Welcome back. Also, no, according to Daniel, you probably cannot actually eat, this kind of berries that have fallen off of the grass types because technically that means that they are from Pokemon who made them that are still alive, which means that it would be considered eating the flesh of a living creature, and that's one of the rules that applies actually even if you aren't Jewish. Look, I will put that part in the show notes, okay? It's really fun. Anyway, that is not today's topic, right? So, podcast listeners, I want you to know that I was absolutely irritating the bejesus out of AM the other day. I was really struggling to figure out what it is that I wanted to talk about for this podcast, right? I was essentially badgering him, and I kept sitting there treating him like I was Jennifer Lawrence on Hot Ones, and I'm just like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? Now, while the GIF is very funny, and yes, GIF with a G sound, not a J sound. Anyway, irrelevant. While he was being as gracious as he could be about my pestering, something about being at work and having to focus, he did actually ask me to think about what my favorite Disney movie was when I was a kid and whether it held up. And so here's the thing. I don't think that this is the first time that I've mentioned that The Little Mermaid was my favorite movie from the Disney era back in the day. My parents tried to trick me into thinking that I chose not to go to a concert because they weren't actually going to let me go. There's okay, well, you can go to the concert with, your dad and your older sister, or you can have the VHS of The Little Mermaid. Obviously, I chose The Little Mermaid VHS, okay? It was 1989. I was 4, okay? I mean, yes, also, it is very cool that I had, the original 1989 VHS cover because it means that I did have the very special castle design. But again, I was 4. I didn't know anything that was going on in the world because I was 4, right? Now, I'm just going to point out the fact that The Little Mermaid being my jam in particular was something that, honestly, a lot of the little girls in the late 80s and 90s, they would probably have a similar view on, right? You could wear, if you had red hair, if you had a purple coconut shirt and green bottoms, or even a green top, you could have a solid Ariel cosplay, which is actually, it's kind of funny because she did actually spend a lot of time in the blue dress whenever she was on land, but that's not what we're focusing on right now. The movie was a classic for a lot of millennials, but I think that we're going to have to go ahead and put some respect on the original story and then come back to whatever it is that was happening in 1989, right? So let's actually start by, what we do on this pod, formally introducing the man who actually wrote The Little Mermaid original story. Hans Christian Andersen was born April 2nd, 1805 in Odense, Denmark, and he actually passed on August 4th in 1875. So, pretty solid 70 years or so. I personally would love to have the kind of prolificness that he did because he has children still reading the stories 150 years plus later, okay? He's got the ugly duckling. He's got the snow queen, the emperor's new clothes, princess and the pea, the red shoes. Okay, your boy was writing. And on that writer front, despite what Jane Austen said, apparently this wealthy man was not in search of a wife, which is interesting for a man in this general time frame. He never, in fact, married or had children, right? It's very possible that he did not have a wife or children, but was able to manage to live his life happily. Now, I don't know for sure how it is that he was able to do so, but I will say that there's a lot of queer longing that a lot of people have run into the Little Mermaid version, right? The Nordic countries may be a little bit ahead of us in most of their human rights kind of, setups and everything like that. But let's be honest, they weren't so ahead of the rest of the world in the years that men doing the exact same thing with a man that they were doing with a woman would not suffer, some kind of criminal liability, okay? Sodomy laws still existed, and they low-key exist in various parts of the world today. We're not going to go too deeply into that at this exact second, but what we are going to do is have a quick refresher on the original story, because let's be honest, Hans was telling a completely different story than whatever it is that Walt was telling later, okay? All right, so first item of business. Hans's version of The Little Mermaid does not actually have a name, okay? So, she's not passing the Bechdel test anytime soon because, again, she does not have a name, okay? I mean, it's probably why she was called The Little Mermaid and not Ariel, the girl who sold her fins, or something like that. I don't know. Now, in the original, HCA version, she does have 5 older sisters. So, yay! Family! And she actually also has a grandmother who is the one who oversees the ocean. And she actually has, a lot of really solid family that's, there in the narrative and everything that, she's able to rely on and communicate with before the actual, kind of meat of the story gets going. Right? Her sisters, actually, in the story, are curious about the human world the same way that the Little Mermaid is, right? And they do try to help her whenever she's decided that, what she wants to go and explore is a little bit, too exploratory for her own safety, right? Now, I'm not sure actually if exploratory is the right word for this, because within the universe of the world that Hans wrote, mermaids do not have souls. They live for about 300 years altogether, and then when they die, they just kind of turn into sea foam, right? Humans do, of course, have immortal souls, and a mermaid could gain an immortal soul if a human were to fall deeply in love enough with them to marry the mermaid, right? I'm sitting here trying to, I'm having a whole moment. I'm just like, why are the sirens luring men to them? Actually, hang on. No, cycle back. The sirens are actually Greek, and they weren't actually luring men to them. They were just sitting and existing and doing a whole little sing-song while they were combing their hair. The fact that these sailors decided that they had to go and molest the sirens had nothing to do with the fact that the sirens were just sitting there and singing a song. Having said that, their song might have been particularly known for luring sailors because, let's be honest, if the opening notes to Back That Ass Up starts playing, millennials are going to either start stretching in preparation or they're going to go ahead and flock to the dance floor, okay? And don't even get me started with the emos on the opening note to Black Parade, okay? Anyway, that is not the point. The point that I'm saying is that mermaids in this cosmology could possibly get a soul if they were able to get a human to fall in love with them and marry them. And the Little Mermaid saw a prince and she was really, really into him, right? So she went to the sea witch to see if she could get a spell that would let her go and be on land. And she could, but it would be very, very unpleasant in ways that are they're really difficult for me personally to understand the Little Mermaid herself signing off on. First item of business, the witch did actually cut out her tongue. Not just removing her voice, taking her entire tongue. So now she's also going to, like, struggle to eat food. Her mouth's going to have a whole lot of problems in general because tongues are supposed to be there, right? And then you have the fact that every step that she would be taking would be like walking on knives. Now, I don't get the feeling this is the kind of thing where this is a person who's like able to, like, kind of like walk on like the big pile of nails, or like, lay on the big pile of nails, because they're able to kind of distribute, spread their weight a little bit. And I'm pretty sure that the way that the story is being written is that she's being stabbed in the foot every time that she puts any kind of pressure on them, right? I've had some very high stilettos, and I've had my feet hurt very much after wearing them, but at least my feet aren't hurting as soon as I get out of bed in the morning. But you know what? She does all this, and she's human, and she's able to go and meet the prince, which honestly, that's actually pretty impressive considering the fact that she is so unusual in her presentation. And I really have to emphasize the part where she doesn't have tongue, right? I mean, like, the prince does like her, and he does actually hang out with her in the story, right? He thinks she's fun. She's a lovely person, but he doesn't think that she's wife material for him, right? Possibly because she can't have a conversation, because I cannot express to you how much that she does not have a tongue. Honestly, I'm not even sure how she's able to eat, right? Because, like, first off, she's used to life as a mer person, right? So she's trying to eat land food, right? It's cooked. I don't know if her stomach is, like, really used to that. It's probably all kinds of uncomfortable. And then I remind her of the fact that she does not have a tongue, right? Okay. So the prince does actually find the wife material, and he marries said wife material, who is somebody completely different from the Little Mermaid, right? Now, again, it's not like he had an obligation to our mermaid turned human. But, I know that the wedding announcement was stressful for her. So she's out by the ocean trying to ponder her next moves, and her sisters arrive. The ones that I mentioned were all there backing her up, and were also kind of interested in the human world. Not as interested as she was, but I digress. So the Little Mermaid's out by the ocean trying to ponder her next move, and her sisters have been like, hey, look, we have all cut our hair, and we have traded it to the sea witch. Here is a knife. If you kill that man and let the blood from, after you've killed him, drip onto your feet, the Little Mermaid can go back to her ocean life, right? But she does make the choice that actually is the one that we would kind of sign off on the pod. The official position of this podcast is that we do not kill people who reject us and then marry somebody else, okay? The downside to this, though, is that she's no longer able to just, like, finish the rest of her 300 years and sea foam with the rest of her sisters. The next morning, she actually is sea foam, which is a lot, right? Now, look, I will say it's perfectly reasonable to read the story as entirely girl meets boy, right? Totally reasonable. But trying to change your entire body and removing your own voice to try to fit in somewhere that says, no, I'm sorry, otherwise you do not belong here if you're not fitting this checklist, it's not something I'd recommend. But at the same time, I'm saying that with the flippancy afforded by modernity and choices and a supportive environment, right? Or I guess the Little Mermaid tried to shove herself into the box that was prepared for her. But it's kind of like walking around with knives on your feet. And I'm just going to say this, walking around on eggshells isn't exactly pleasant either. It's because of the constant vigilance to pretend to the world that there isn't a gap between your presentation and what is actually comfortable for you has bedeviled many queer people who've been shoved into the cishet box. And honestly, even when you're able to get the majority of you into that box, it doesn't guarantee success, right? Because let's talk about the guilt trip that Christian Andersen added to the end of the story, right? Now, apparently the Little Mermaid became a daughter of air. So she can actually sit there and work to gain an immortal soul through a century of good deeds. But if the humans in her general vicinity are doing bad deeds, then it can lengthen the amount of time for the mermaid herself to get a soul. Now, personally, I don't love the fact that the ability to have an immortal soul is entirely tied to what it is that humans are doing. But I didn't write the story in the first place, and not my cosmology, right? I mean, look, this story as a whole has been translated into a whole lot of languages. There have been a number of adaptations all over the world because, I mean, it's been around for a while, right? There's Russian animation, there's Japanese animation, and there's like an American animation. Because let's point out the fact that it is actually a Danish fairy tale. So, like, the fact that it gets to America means it's pretty international by the time it gets to us, okay? Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and talk about the 1989 Disney Renaissance kicking off masterpiece that is The Little Mermaid. Now, look, in the late 80s and 90s, Howard Ashman had Disney in a chokehold. Now, you know how in a lot of ways you just assume that Lin-Manuel Miranda is going to be attached to the next Disney soundtrack? Howard Ashman, Alan Menken, and Tim Rice were pretty much that specific guy for, again, that time frame, late 80s and 90s. Ashman and Miranda are also both big Broadway guys, right? And so their successful shows are known for having the very serious I Want songs and also the very big 11 o'clock numbers. We've talked about this before. Go back and check previous episodes. Anyway, the trope of having big emotions that lead into a song actually made Disney like very well known in the 90s for having some amazing music, okay? And Moana and Encanto and Coco, they're doing their best to become new modern classics, all right? Now, we're going to focus back on Ashman and like his work with The Little Mermaid, right? It's worth noting that during this time frame that they are working on the project, though, the AIDS crisis was in full effect. And Ronald Reagan wasn't really out here just like saying anything about the disease that had previously been known as GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency syndrome, before it was renamed once they realized that it wasn't just the dirty gays who were susceptible to this now endemic disease. When 100,000 people died of COVID, it was front page news. When 100,000 people died of AIDS, it was a blur several pages in. Man, the Reagan era did a number on us, so we're not going to talk about that. What we are going to talk about is this. Anyway, Ashman seemed to have brought with him, beyond the Broadway thing, an awareness of how both the compulsory heterosexuality of our characters and also a queer view of the story is part of your world, just a longing to collect more stuff or to be able to move about freely. Does Ariel actually want to just catalog things? Or does she imagine a world where people on land don't reprimand their daughters for wanting to expand beyond their father's demand? Because, I mean, let's think about it, right? As long as you live under my ocean, you'll obey my rules. Doesn't exactly give Ariel the impression that she's actually going to be able to really, find a place where she could live as she'd want to without having to deal with her dad's rules. I will leave the lyrical analysis to you, but the reprise of Part of Your World shows a new and very focused determination to figure out how to get onto land after Ariel meets Eric. Now, what Ashman did also bring was an appreciation of the legendary drag queen divine. Now, look, we can absolutely plan a John Waters retrospective if you would like. But let me tell you, in 1989, I just saw Purple Octopus Lady. I mean, I'm sure the adults appreciate it, right? There's a very specific mannerism, speech, dramatic makeup. The camp of it all was completely lost on me until I was much older because, again, I have to emphasize the fact that I was 4 when this came out. I have, in fact, made up for lost time, though, okay? Because let's be honest, can anyone be filthier than divine? No. And if you don't know what that is in reference to, then you're going to have to go ahead and do some research. Anyway, what is interesting, though, as we move forward, is that with the 2023 remake, Melissa McCarthy, who was cast in the role of Ursula, played the role the way that you would expect Melissa McCarthy to do so, right? And not like Divine. And people were pissed. Oh my God, they were so mad. How dare the remake of a movie not be a carbon copy of the original one and look and behave exactly like the version that I have in my mind? Look, I will admit that I did not actually see the Melissa McCarthy vision at first, but ultimately she was fine, right? Although, let's be honest, the controversial casting there was only a little bit Melissa, right? The main controversial casting honor goes to Halle Bailey, right? Halle had the audacity, the temerity, the outright gall to be cast as Ariel when they did the live action remake. Now, listen, I am biased, okay? Chloe and Halle are high on my all-time playlist. I was ready for Halle to hit the kind of epic notes that really honestly remind me that as an alto, I literally do not have a range, right? And the people on the internet, for some reason, were ready to declare the complete disappearance of redheads. Mary Jane Watson being played by Zendaya, April O'Neil being voiced by and, colored as a Black woman in TMNT. It's just proof that Jessica Chastain, Christina Hendricks, Amy Adams, they've all disappeared. And maybe Marie Devil's isn't Scottish anymore. Who knows? Where's Starfire from? Nobody knows anymore. Actually, the disappearance of Amy Adams causes even more issues because she did, in fact, play Giselle in Enchanted, where we had a Jodie Benson cameo. The thing that's the wildest about the backlash is the fact that Ariel's red hair and Dorothy's ruby slippers were both changed in the movies from the original story, largely because the red contrast is visually striking. Dorothy had silver shoes in the book, and the mermaid in the Hans Christian Andersen story didn't have a name. Why would you expect her to have a hair color? Anyway, the remake was great. Halle's facial and body language were very expressive. Actually, enough that I felt like she was able to communicate in many ways. And it turned out that she and Eric actually had things in common, besides, teenage lust. Let's also not forget that in 1989, we were rooting for a 16-year-old to run away from home and married the first dude whose personal space she bumped into. Miss Mammy, you are 16 years old, all right? If you don't sit your little behind down, okay, you can't even get tattooed at that age, all right? But also, let's not get too excited with, the remake from 2023, because that Ariel was 18. Congrats on not having her be a minor, I suppose. But your girl's also still a teen bride, and based on the timing that we have, that man is at least 21, all right? There is an age gap. Anyway, now that I think about it, though, I am the exact right age for her daddy. So I'm gonna go take a quick moment to remind myself that it will not work because I don't like water on my face, and also, Javier Bardem's King Triton is fictional. Welcome back to our thrilling conclusion. So, the original question that I was actually asked was, does the story hold up? Honestly, I don't know how to answer it. The movie that I grew up with came out over 35 years ago. And let's be honest, the conversation that I remember was definitely focused on more of the cover art and the various, pervy Disney rumors that were going around, rather than parsing the fact that a high school girl is leaving behind her whole life, her family, everything that she knows to go and live with the first boy that she's connected with. It's really, really hard to condone that, especially as we're waiting for them to release the rest of the Epstein files, Pamela. But no, I remember my boyfriend when I was young, somebody that I needed to be married to. Not a good plan. But I do think that there is actually a part of the story that holds up, and that part is in the original Little Mermaid. She presented herself as a romantic option to someone she was interested in. He didn't choose her. And now, as outside observers, without personal stakes in the story, her choosing to become Seafoam instead of killing him comes across as a surprise because she is our protagonist, right? But like I said earlier, he doesn't deserve to die because he didn't choose her. Striking out in love is painful, but that doesn't mean the person who is interested deserves to be hurt in retaliation. So that's actually like the main part that holds up. Kind of wild, honestly. So, as we sit there and think about the various ways that history is completely different then than it was now, let's look at some of the things that are on your calendar, yeah? So, I would like to point out the fact that on March 6, 1917, we have the birth of Will Eisner, all right? Now, the Eisner Awards are actually named in his honor, and they recognize outstanding achievements in the comics medium each year. So this man could not be more important to the whole nerd cred system if he tried, because the comics achievements are named after him. We have the debut of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy debuting on BBC Radio March 8th, 1978. Now, we're still annoyed with the BBC overall because they decided that they wanted to be a little bit messy with their slur airing, but The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has been around long enough that, realistically speaking, you know that the answer to life, the universe, and everything is, in fact, 42. So, moving on. We also have that the series debut of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series, was on March 10th, 1997. It was a, mid-season premiere. Back. Boo Joss Whedon for being gross to women. Yay, Sarah Michelle Gellar for bringing the show back. So, I would like to point out, though, that our most important date on this calendar, though, is the birthday of Xena Brody. She was actually the first editor of the DC Comics romance line. And if you remember from season 1, we talked about how the romance line is really important for keeping comics overall. Like, the whole publishing industry was able to stay viable during the 1950s. Let's all give a shout out to Xena Brody for making sure that we actually have comics. Right. It's important. Anyway, listeners, we have in fact come to the end of our podcast. I know. How is it over so soon? Well, good news. Our next episode's coming out next week. You're also, of course, more than welcome to listen to this episode again if that's not fast enough. And you're also welcome to join our Patreon, www.patreon.com/upyournerdcredpod, where, you can get solo scripts, behind the scene footage, all kinds of stuff. Nerd cred takes time to build. But once you can get on the other side of you're 16 years old, young lady, you don't need to be sitting there running off and marrying anybody. Then we can start to have the actual conversations about how messed up the entire Disney canon is towards most of the young ladies. Anyway, it's now time to mention that we have an Instagram. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube. We're working on expanding our reach. If you like the episode, you should rate, review, subscribe, and also, make sure you let other people know what's going on, especially if you're trying to up your nerd cred. You can follow us on Instagram at Up Your Nerd Cred Pod. If you're looking for me across platforms, you can follow me at Curacy Davis. And you can follow our co-host, Tim, is at MDSArt. So please go ahead and yell at him about continuity errors or show him the fan art, the really good fan art. You know what I'm talking about. If you have a burning question that you want us to discuss so that you can up your nerd cred, make sure you like and subscribe and leave comments and things like that. And if we pick your question, we'll actually make sure that we were like, shouting you out in the discussion segment. So go ahead and make sure that you like and subscribe and, follow the various links in the show notes. Get your friends to like and subscribe, and your family and your coworkers. And maybe if you have a kid, you should ask their teacher to, get on board with this. Anyway, good night, everybody.